before. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our workshop today on enhancing the employee experience with custom integrations. My name is Mohammed Khalid. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering here at BetterCloud. I've actually been here for about 4.5 years, and my team is responsible for proving the technical value and the use case fit for both our existing customers as well as prospective new customers.
And my name is Justin Little. I'm the team lead on the customer engineering team. I've been with BetterCloud over 2 years at this point, and my team has done everything from build integrations in the Integration Center platform to teach customers how to build custom integrations themselves and extend the platform to its fullest potential.
IT's priorities are shifting in the SaaS ops world. And one theme you're going to hear throughout the conference, you're going to continuously hear about employee experience, IT efficiency, and reducing security risks. For today's session, we're really going to hone in on the employee experience and IT efficiency part. And when we talk about employee experience, we're talking about enhanced productivity for your employees by making sure we're not only connecting to SaaS apps that are important for them, but giving you the flexibility to connect to the future apps that you implement in your environment. And when we talk about IT efficiency, it's around automating those manual operational tasks that you and your teams are executing on a day-to-day basis. Now, what is BetterCloud? Well, BetterCloud is the first all-in-one SaaS management platform that helps organizations discover, manage, and secure the SaaS apps within your environment. Now, when we talk about discover, that actually means enhanced visibility. What are the type of apps that your employees are authenticating into and giving access to? Are these redundant apps that don't need to be used within your environment? Or is there high utilization in these apps and you might want to fold this into the portfolio of SaaS apps that you currently have implemented? When it comes to manage, it's around that increased efficiency again, automation at scale, and controlling all your SaaS apps from one central console. And when it comes to reduce security risk, reducing your risk, it's really tied to how your employees interacting with the collaboration suites within your environment. Is there sensitive data leaking? Is there exposure that you should know about? Now, earlier today in our keynote, you heard our CEO, David Politis, talk about how IT's role is evolving due to SaaS ops. And today's focus, we're going to show you how BetterCloud has been extended to allow IT teams to address various use cases through customization. Now, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to jump into a high-level 5-10 minute demo of the very core use cases of BetterCloud with the Integration Center and the automation. The reason we're going to do this is we have a lot of folks joining this session today that are both not only existing customers, but prospective customers. So we want to make sure everybody's on the same level field when it comes to our marketplace of SaaS apps and how we handle automation before we jump into the deeper custom integrations conversation. So let's go ahead and jump into the demo. And what you'll see is as you enter BetterCloud, you'll see that we have a marketplace of SaaS apps. We currently connect with over 60 SaaS apps out there, and this list is continuously growing. So as you look at this list and you start looking at these SaaS apps, you might be using SaaS apps like Google, Microsoft, Duo, and more. So BetterCloud connects directly to these SaaS apps through an API integration. So you're not having to install anything on a proxy. It is a direct API integration. And depending on the application, either we're ingesting data or we're able to extend the automation by just executing actions into those SaaS apps that are very important to you. If we look at my environment real quick, you'll see that I have about 67 SaaS apps installed. And the one key thing I want to call out here is not only can you connect to the SaaS apps within your environment, but you can actually connect to multiple instances. So if you have multiple instances of your Google environment, you might have a contractor environment, a production environment, or you may be doing mergers and acquisitions. You can absolutely connect to multiple instances of those applications and bring that all within your fold from an efficiency perspective because you are controlling it from one console. Now, that's a little bit about our marketplace of SaaS apps. But let's go ahead and jump into what happens after you've connected a SaaS app into the environment. What you'll see here is this is our automation engine. And just as a quick one-on-one item, our automation engine goes off of a when, if, then approach. So when something happens, and any of these core SaaS apps that we may be listening to, whatever events it may be, whether it's the native events we're listening to around user creation or being added to a group, et cetera, we can execute a workflow based on those events and then kick off the appropriate API actions. So as you'll see here, as soon as you've connected your SaaS apps, you're going to see all the available API calls that we natively support show up in this list, and you're able to fire off the workflow as needed. In this case, we're looking at an employee experience workflow when it comes to onboarding. So here we're saying when a user is created in Google, and not only are they created, they're created and their department is sales and their city is New York, maybe we want to go ahead and kick off the appropriate workflow. In this case, we might want to go ahead and automatically create an incident in your ITSM, in this case, ServiceNow, to monitor and track that this workflow is being executed and from an audit and compliance perspective. Now, since the user was sales, maybe what we want to do is automatically associate them to the account executives group or share the appropriate team drive with them. And what you'll see is as we're going down here, this is a multi-SaaS workflow. So when we talk about creating a user, even though this event kicked off from Google, we can absolutely create the user in the additional SaaS applications. And when we talk about increasing IT efficiency, a big aspect of that when it comes to our automation is the scalability approach that BetterCloud takes. So what you'll see here is we have the first name, the last name, the email, the users that we have to populate. But rather than you having to go and stitch this together, whether it's through scripts or other things, what you'll see is I can directly go here and say, you know what, let's use our operational intelligence of what BetterCloud's actually ingesting and the information we have and say, even though this is a Salesforce user, what we want to do is we want to associate the Google profile first name to the Salesforce user first name, as you'll see here. And that's that operational intelligence, because you're not having to stitch that together by any means. We have that there for you. As we scroll down further, you'll see that, you know what, maybe we want to, based on their role, assign the appropriate license and set their time zone. So this is that multi-SaaS workflow that's being built out for them. In this case, you'll see even in Slack, we're creating the user, we're associating them based on their title, their appropriate channels and user groups and whatnot. Now, if we go down further, you're going to see here that not only are we able to fire off these sequential API calls, but we're also able to bake pauses in this workflow. So we could say, you know what, let's go ahead and pause the workflow for one day, and let's get an approval from the manager before we continue with any further provisioning. And this goes back to the operational intelligence again, right? So I talked about the scalability, but even from an operational intelligence perspective, we're able to go in here and say, you know what, let's get the approval from whoever that manager is that's associated with their profile. You're not getting a data dump of all the records that's available in the system. We're giving you the rich, meaningful information that would be needed for the type of workflow that you're building. So that's a very high level, and let me go ahead and set this. That's a very high level understanding of BetterCloud's marketplace and how the workflows work. But now let's pause for a second. Justin, in your environment and in your role, how often are you talking to customers that want to extend the capabilities? The reality is that we have about 60 plus SaaS apps that we're working with out of the box, and that list is continuously growing. But the reality is that there's around 13,000 SaaS apps in the world. So tell me a little bit about what you hear from your customers as you're implementing them.
Right, Mo. As you said, we have tons of applications and integrations that we support natively in the product. However, when a customer comes to us and says, I want to build a new application, we have the power to do that with the Integration Center, building net new integrations with these APIs. However, there's also the use case of extending our current integration with new use cases. For example, if a customer wanted to extend an existing integration by adding a user to a permission set in ShareFile, for example, we have the power to do that by adding those extensions to the integration and build that into your workflow.
No, that's awesome, Justin. And I think that's exactly the example we're going to go through right now. So we do have that flexibility. As I mentioned, 13,000 SaaS apps in the world. We want to make sure you have that flexibility to connect to the apps that are important to you, increase your IT efficiency, and make sure all those manual tasks that you're executing can be automated through an SMP like BetterCloud. So what you'll see here is, let's look at step 32 for an example. Step 32, we're automatically creating a user in LeanKit. It's a project management solution. But what if you want to do more? And that's the native actions that we're getting. As a matter of fact, if I go back in here and I show you LeanKit, you'll see that this is a native integration. But in this case, the actions we have are create user and delete user. But what if you wanted to actually add them to the appropriate boards, the teams that they're associated with, and the boards they'll be working with as part of your workflow? So if I go back to this integration center and go to my install section here, first thing I want to do before I jump into LeanKit is we do have the ability to build net new custom integrations. So if I click on this, for example, you'll see I can call this whatever, new integration. I can select the appropriate logo from the dropdown. And at this point, I can specify the authentication method that their APIs allow for. So are they using bearer tokens? Is it basic auth, etc. Right? In today's example, we're actually going to extend an existing integration because it works the same way, especially when we get to the next screen. But I did want you to see that you are able to build net new integrations as well. The extending of the application is exactly the same way. So from here, what I'm going to do is, we talked about Lean Kit. I'll open this up, and you'll see here we have the appropriate actions of creating and deleting the user. But we do want to modify this. We want to do more, right? So what we want to do is we want to be able to add them to a board automatically. So you'll see here it's giving me the ability to create my extension. But before I do that, let's go ahead and switch gears. So this is the Lean Kit board I want to add them to. And what I'm actually going to do is, Justin, you're going to be my guinea pig. I'm going to use your personal email address to see whether you can be added to this board or not. So if I go into settings, look at the board settings, we'll look at the board user access, and here we'll see that Justin does not have access to this board. So one of the things we want to do before we confirm anything is, or before we start building anything per se, is actually confirm that the APIs are available. So when I look at LeanKit's APIs, it is a REST-based API. It supports the authentication methods that we're able to support out of the box. And it has an example here of what's exactly needed to build out the integration. So we'll need the board ID, we'll need the email, and the role itself. Okay, so at this point, we're going to go back to LeanKit. We're going to come in here and one more time confirm that Justin X Little does not have access to this board. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back here in BetterCloud. We're creating that extension. You'll see here that there's quite a few extensions we can create, whether we're building it out for a workflow, a trigger, which you'll hear about in a moment, send a push event, or even utilize transformation scripts, which is when you want to make multiple calls and do some searching before you parse the information back. We may refer to that moving forward, but let's go ahead and build out the action for the workflow. So what we're going to do is we're going to say add user to board, write a description. This action adds a user to a board. When I mentioned the pre-request script, we won't need that today, but just know that we have deep capabilities to even build out scripts. That way, if you have to do some searching and then return that information back into the payload that we could parse in the workflow, that ability is there. Now, since we know that LeanKit has abilities with the APIs to add a user to a board, let me go ahead and get that right here from my instance. I'm going to add some headers. So it's going to be content type since it's required. I'm going to go ahead and add another header here. Same thing. We're going to now test the action. Now we do have to test the action before this action becomes available within the workflow itself. We want to make sure that there is an endpoint we're able to reach and that we have a successful test. So what I'm going to do is I already have the payload ready. So in order to add a user to a board, we want to be able to specify the board ID, the email, and the new role. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and run the test. You'll see here the test was successful. And we can confirm the test was successful because, as I showed you earlier, Justin did not have access to this board. And if I go into board settings now and click on board user access, lo and behold, he does have that access. It shows that he's a reader now and he's not set as no access.
Thank you, Mo.
Anytime, Justin. You can utilize my project management tool whenever you want. So let's go ahead and jump back in here, go to next. Now, after we've tested that payload, we can actually go further, and that same operational intelligence I showed you within the workflows, those dynamic properties where you're able to refer to manager, where you're able to refer to the relevant information, we can actually choose here what we want showing up as an option and whether it's a required field or not. Now, emails required, actually all three of these are required. So I'm going to save this now. So now when I close this, and I go back to our workflow engine. So I'll go back to that workflow we were looking at before. What you're going to see is what we were doing is we were creating the user, then we were waiting for an approval before the user was provisioned anywhere else. Now, if we go back into this workflow, let me go ahead and collapse the screen. What you're going to see is there should be a new action available within the workflow itself. So let's go ahead, let's scroll down. We see we have step 33 to create a user. Prior to us building out the integration, we only had create user and delete user. In this case now, I can go ahead and say, all right, let's click on Plan View Lean Kit. And lo and behold, we have that ability to add the user to the board. So at this point, I can add the user to the board. That action's going to show up here. If I can move it up, I'll actually move it up right after the approval. And you'll see that's asking for the board ID. This is something that you can do directly hard-coded in. I have the board ID itself, but this is also where that script example comes into play. So if you wanted to use a script that portion I showed you earlier, you could actually have a script that automatically searches for the board name and put that information back in here. But you'll see as I click on this, I'm able to specify whatever I need for this aspect. So if I say email address, I can say automatically go ahead and add this user with this email address to the appropriate board. So we know what the board role will be is board reader. We could have this in here from a scalable perspective and then put in the appropriate ID for any time this workflow kicks off, because it'll be provisioning folks into the same board or multiple boards as you would want. So that's an example right there. You know, when we talk about increasing IT efficiency and helping you automate those manual operational tasks, what you just saw me do right there, I want to be clear, I'm not a developer. That's not my day-to-day, but it took about, what, 5 or 7 minutes to just build a quick new action for an existing integration and add that into the workflow. So when we talk about operational intelligence and automation at scale, this was a pure example of that. Now, Justin, this was an example of me extending a current integration to execute more actions. But what if we actually want to, go back here? We look at this when, if, then statement, and right now we're looking at all the apps that we can listen to and kick off a workflow from. There are some custom apps in here too. So tell me a little bit about that. I do want to pass the mic to you. What are our options when it comes to extending what we can listen to and what we can actually kick off from?
That's a good point, Mo. So what if we wanted to trigger BetterCloud from an external source? What if we wanted to trigger a workflow based on a custom event? Well, we can do that with custom triggers in BetterCloud, and I'll hop into an example right now. So if we take a look at our integration center, one common example that we see is maybe triggering a BetterCloud workflow from your HRIS system, or perhaps an application request from an incoming ticket in Jira. So we have all of these integrations at our disposal, right? But what if I wanted to extend the capabilities of Jira Service Desk by creating a new custom trigger to where BetterCloud listens for that event coming in, a new ticket is created for an application request, for a Slack, for granting access to Slack for a given user. Let's hop into that and see what that looks like. So you see I have all of these integrations. I've already installed a Jira Service Desk integration here. And I'm going to go into extensions, and we're going to create a new extension here. So I'll go to add a new extension, and you see I have a couple things here, but what I'm interested in is creating a trigger for workflows. So when you create a custom trigger, you give the trigger a name, and I'll call this application request. And I will go to configure my custom trigger, and you'll notice that it gives me an endpoint here. And this is an endpoint that we will copy and put in our triggering application to test the connection from the triggering application into BetterCloud to make sure that we're receiving that data correctly and see what those incoming fields are that we can condition the workflow off of later. So I'll copy this and I'll go over to Jira. So you'll notice I'm already working on a new automation, but I'll start from scratch here and create a new automation. So you'll see here that if I create a new automation rule, I can declare a trigger. So let's say a new issue is created in Jira. I'll save this as my trigger and add a new condition for an issue field. So let's say the description contains application access request. When this event happens, when a new incident is created in Jira Service Desk and the description contains application access request, we want to send a request into BetterCloud with that ticket data. So let me find where that lives. So we'll send a web request, and this web request will actually be the custom trigger URL that we generated before in BetterCloud. So I'll go ahead and paste this here. And one thing you'll notice is the authorization for this request is already configured in the URL. So we don't need to do any additional custom authorization configuration there. And by default, Jira is going to send us application JSON format for that data. So we don't need to configure any additional headers here. And this will be a post method. In the web request body, we can select issue data as all of the ticket data that we send. But what if I wanted to send custom data? I can do that and configure specific fields from that Jira Service Desk ticket. And I already have my payload here for what I'm referencing. So all we're concerned about here is the user's email and the application that we want to grant them access to. I can add more fields here if I want to. I can create custom fields in Jira like I did here for application and reference those in the custom data body. So what I'll do is validate with a real Jira Service Desk ticket. So I've created a ticket already, and I'll paste the issue key here and validate that we can hit the endpoint and that data is sent properly. And we see that it was a 200 OK and our request was successful. And I'm going to take a look into this request, and you'll notice the application request was for Slack, and you'll see my user populated here. So let's take a look at BetterCloud. First, I'm going to save this and hop over to BetterCloud and see that my request was received, and we'll configure our options for the workflow that we want to create next. So one thing to note here, you can view your raw data response and see that we're getting our proper keys here. The test value here is obfuscated for security reasons, but what we care about here is that we're getting our email and our application from the incoming request. And more about targets here. This is for tracing that event. What if I wanted to take a look at what events are triggering from this external application, or what is happening to trigger these workflows? Then I can trace this with a value in the response. So we can see that Stanley Smith at enablebettercloud.com was the triggering event for this trigger to occur. So I'll select email here, and we notice a few parameters that were in the data that was sent from Jira. I'll select these as potential dynamic field values that I can reference in my workflow later. And what if I wanted to create separate workflows for different application requests? I can do that by selecting application as a potential if condition, so that I can create workflows for Slack, Dropbox, etc.
Justin, let me pause you there, because what you just went through right there was a huge thing. Because right now we're talking about not only custom triggers and kicking off a workflow directly from a custom trigger, but as you're about to go into your workflow and open it up, what you just showed there with the emails and applications, correct me if I'm not wrong here, but those were custom fields that you built in Jira. So it's not only custom triggers, but it's also custom scoping conditions, custom ifs, right?
Exactly. So we have more power to do more with our triggering applications from our sources of truth, from our ITSM systems, with creating that customization there and extending the capabilities of the platform, and being able to trigger our workflows in BetterCloud from any source. So you'll notice here in Jira Service Desk, I have a new when trigger, and that is application request, like I created before. And I can add if conditions for the application that I want to grant this user access to. So I'll add this if condition and say, if the field is Slack for application, then let's grant that user access into Slack. And one cool thing I want to show you here is BetterCloud has a native action for getting a user's data by email. And that extends to other integrations as well. So I'm going to select find user by email. With this find user by email action, I can reference that user's Google attributes as well. So I will populate that user's email here. And then in my next action, where I grant the user access to Slack and I create their profile, I'll be able to reference their Google attributes for that.
Is that it's not just Google, right? Like that action is so powerful because it's going to reference whatever the customer source of truth is. So if it's Google, if it's Okta, if it's Microsoft, etc., that's the power of the action, because that customer already lives within the environment. So now you're actually able to call on those rich dynamic fields that we looked at earlier.
Exactly. This references every application that that user has an associated account with. So we can reference their source of truth from whatever integration that's coming from. And so I'm just building this user's account now from the user's associated attributes. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and pass it back over to Mo. But this is a workflow example of how we would trigger from a new incoming request from Jira Service Desk for an application access request for a given user.
No, that's powerful. I mean, it's very, very powerful. Both not only extending to an existing application that you have within your environment and extending the capabilities there, but also being able to trigger off of an external application, whether it's an app that we connect with natively and you're building a new trigger, or an app we don't connect with at all and building that trigger to listen to it. And the part that even got me more excited, honestly, Justin, was that those custom conditionings as well, because you can always add those fields in your source system and have a really dynamic, customizable workflow in that perspective. That was the demo portion and really what we wanted to cover in the workshop today. So the key takeaways we want you to focus on is, BetterCloud has always been flexible, and now with custom integrations and what we're able to do with not only extending and building a brand new integration, but also listening to, the flexibility has been amplified. And because of the amplification of the flexibility, you're enhancing employee experience because you're going to be able to support more apps, bring more apps within the environment. And it's not only about supporting more apps, but support more use cases like Justin just went through, self-service requests. Somebody needs access to Slack, they need access to Dropbox, et cetera. Those aren't new tickets being created anymore, or those are tickets being created, but that's not requiring any manual intervention. It's automatically having BetterCloud automate that for you. And exactly the next point, increasing IT efficiency by automating all those manual tasks that you would have to spend time on. So you can learn more about BetterCloud and all the capabilities that we have, whether it's custom integrations or more. Here are some resources for you. So whether you want to request a demo, join our world-class SaaS Ops community that has thousands and thousands of professionals talking about all the best practices of SaaS Ops and helping evolve what SaaS Ops is. You can always visit our help center, and we have an absolutely fantastic new BetterCloud certification that we rolled out earlier this year, and you have the resource to get that as well. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time. Justin, thank you for walking us through an awesome example of building out a custom trigger and custom if conditions. And thank you, everyone.